Can we talk a little bit about Clark County?
Yeah, I'd love to.
So in your most sort of honest description of your view of Clark County and the Republicans here, how do you describe what's going on around here?
Entertaining. Lively.
But I mean,
certainly not a sleepy place.
well, okay, yeah, I'm going with all those words, but you know, if you were just sort of like talking amongst friends,
Yeah.
how would you describe it?
I think you all have. I was impressed. You know, the things I've read over the months about your assessment of what's going on. I know you've been very involved. I think you have a pretty good understanding of what is at play.
That's the politically correct way of saying something, I think. Do you think there should be some changes in the Republican hierarchy here?
So, as chairman of the state, as you know, I cannot. I've got 39 counties,
Got it.
all of which have drama, and
Not as much as this one,
no, I think you all are number one.
though. Okay.
We're number one at something.
Yeah. There you go.
We win.
But you know, there's also something kind of wonderful. When elections are interesting, more people are talking and participating. When elections don't get anybody's interest, you really can't. It's sort of like Donald Trump in the debates. You know, it's you've got a little bit of a Trumpism going on down here, where people are paying attention and they're talking about it. I stayed last night with folks. I'm pointing at you because I know you've been involved at Peace Health.
Mm-hmm.
And I have old friends he's an executive now down here, and they just recently moved a year ago. So it's not like they're born and raised in Clark County. And they could talk about what has been going on in this election cycle clearly, even though neither one of them is involved in that process. They're not, you know, in the political parties or anything. But it was so interesting last night chatting with them, and they were very knowledgeable. Well, for local elections, that's amazing. And so there's a reason why it feels lively. And that is because you've got some interesting personalities who've been involved.
How important do you think a daily newspaper is in this process?
I think it's way more important that people give it credit for, mostly because we think of the papers that are in the big metropolitan areas. I don't think the Seattle Times has nearly the impact of a paper, a medium-sized, can we call you that, a medium-sized metropolitan paper? And I was just at the Longview Daily News, and they are deeply involved in Cowlitz County politics in 19th District, LD, and I think it's kind of wonderful to see. It feels, you know, I've been to Cowlitz County maybe 3 times, and I could pick up in our conversation at the paper that it would be, it's a good place to call home. You know, there's a community spirit in Cowlitz County that makes it a good place to call home.
Do you think it would be, for example, a politically good move or a bad move to get behind a boycott of the daily newspaper?
All right, so we're moving on to a different subject. You could ask that, is it a very good move to censure your newly re-elected congresswoman? You know, there are a lot of things that have happened in the last couple of years that I'm aware of, and of course I don't get involved with county party politics unless there's been some violation. One of the things in
But don't you counsel at all? I mean, that's not part of your role at all to tell a particular county, hey, maybe you should get it together a little bit.
If in the counties people contact me and ask for help and advice, I counsel.
Well, did that ever happen from Clark County?
No.
So nobody's calling you to say we need help?
Not the current leadership in Central Committee. So, and that's where I think it's very important not to lump in categories that are, I noticed you used, I believe the word far right or right wing, I can't remember in your.
Right-wing bloggers.
Right, yeah, but there was something else that you'd said, maybe calling it far right. I don't know how many different categories of Republicans you've got in Clark County, but it's almost like the Pac-12 or something. I bet you could divide it up into 12 different categories. And so one of the things I weighed in on was the censure some months ago, maybe about 11 months ago. I can't remember when I think there's in that little packet, there's the article. Lauren, did you do that article? I can't remember. The one, my quote is at the very end where I said, I don't think there's going to be a censure. The good people of Clark County will support their congresswoman. And in fact, there wasn't. So there was talk of it that made a lot of news. But I did weigh in because I was concerned about the Republican brand and the Republican name. And so one of the rules of our party, one of the policies of our party is that we support our incumbents. And when you have an incumbent who is reelected with 62%, what you're really doing is you're supporting the democratic process, which is the majority vote. And so that's where I think sometimes people get confused because they, and this happens all over the state and probably all over the nation, people who feel strongly about an issue or a candidate and believe they're right, think that their opinion supersedes majority rule. And in the democratic process, majority rules. And so I think you have a beautiful example of that in this election. A couple days ago, you had majority rule, well, plurality rule at least, and that settles in this jurisdiction. That settles the election. But the idea is basically you've got to get the most votes, and when you do, the people have spoken.
So when you, and I get what you just said there, if you've got a Republican incumbent, you're going to support that Republican incumbent. So are you saying that if you're, and I know you guys do a lot of polling, and I know you have a feel for the strengths and weaknesses of various, let's say for example, state senators. And if you see some troubling numbers for an incumbent, let's say for example, state senator, do you still just support that incumbent regardless?
So there are several organizations that are involved in getting people elected. So in the Senate, on the Senate side, the premier organization is the Senate caucus. And they're the ones that are figuring out where they want to be in the next election cycle. And it could be like we're going to lose a senator, hopefully, because he's going to win the state auditor. Mark Malosha has put his hat in the ring to be state auditor, and so he's going to lose his Senate seat. And so the Senate caucus has to figure out, can we tolerate that? Do we have somebody good who can run and has a good chance of winning?
You don't get involved in that?
I'll talk with them about it. I'll give them my opinion, but they're the ones who
Right.
have the, the support system that comes around Senate candidates and incumbents to help them succeed.
So you think our state senator Don Benton is going to get the support from your group and from the Senate caucus?
I don't know what's going to happen with Don, but I have seen some poll numbers.
What do they look like?
They didn't look very good for him.
Right.
And so I know that the Senate caucus is taking a look at it and seeing if that seat is one that is vulnerable. And,
so is it possible in a situation like that that the Senate caucus, let's use them as opposed to you, might suggest to Don that it's time to move along? Is that a possibility?
I don't know the process that they will use, but I do know that their job is to make sure they don't lose any seats.
Right.
So it's not personal about Don.
No, I get that.
It's about a seat, and a seat has a designation, and it's in a place And so they're gonna be looking at all the seats around the state
Right.
that are vulnerable or sure wins.
And I'm just
And
asking.
those are the ones that they can say, okay, we don't need to worry about the sure win, and let's put all of our efforts into the vulnerable seats.
But when we talk about all of our efforts, sometimes that effort might be, it's time for a new face. That's a possibility, right?
Well, I think that's the joy of politics, you know, it's so dynamic. None of us know what's gonna happen next year. We don't even know who the Republican candidate is going to be, and very likely will be a new face. And so the same thing could happen here. And I don't know enough at this point as to what is going on within that conversation. And also, I mean, a senator represents a constituency, and in that constituency, there are a lot of people with strong opinions, and some of their opinions weigh more than other people's opinions. And I think
But at the end of the day, the voters' opinions weigh the most.
Exactly,
And
and
when those numbers don't look good,
That's right.
that, you could lose a seat, you know,
Yeah.
based on those numbers.